Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, having fun, and staying safe. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about some animals that you may be very familiar with, although there's probably a few things you may not know. Today, we're going to talk about peafowl. Peafowl is the correct term for them. We typically call them peacocks, but peacocks technically only refer to the males. So similar to chickens, who are fairly closely related, males are called roosters or cocks in chickens, and the females are called hens. And the same is true for peafowl. So the males are the peacocks, the females are called peahens, and the babies are called peachicks. Collectively, they're known as peafowl. Peafowl are the largest of all species of pheasants. And there are actually 3 species of peafowl. We're most familiar with the ones that are blue, that have the really huge tails and the bright colors. Those are called the Indian or the blue peafowl. But they have a closely related cousin that lives a little further east of there in Southeast Asia called the green peafowl. And there's an African cousin that is called the Congo peafowl. So they look a little different. The green and the blue are pretty similar in size, although the green have more green feathering across the front side of them, whereas the blue, of course, have that bright blue on the males. The females look fairly similar in both species. The Congo peafowl from Africa are quite a bit smaller. They're more the size of like chickens, and they're a little less ornate in their feathers, although they do still have some fancy little crest feathers on their head and some pretty splendid colors on parts of their body, but they're kind of more adapted to blend into their surroundings. So let's talk a little bit about the different species. So the Indian or the blue peafowl, those live in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Bhutan. Those are the countries in kind of central South Asia. And they are the national bird of India. And they are listed as least concern as far as endangered species go. That means there's a lot of them, which is good news. They're a beautiful bird. They've also been protected in India for hundreds of years and are considered sacred by many of the people who live in India. Traditionally, they were kept near the homes of wealthy people and near the temples and important marketplaces because of their ability to kill and eat and get rid of large snakes like cobras. Peafowl are definitely capable of killing snakes and do so on occasion. So their cousin species that lives in Southeast Asia, the green peafowl, they're listed as endangered. That means there's not very many of them. It's estimated that there's about 20,000 of them left, and they range over a broad range of countries, or at least did historically, in Cambodia, southern China, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. In parts of their range, they are often persecuted as a pest species. They sometimes raid crops, and their very loud vocalizations is not exactly enjoyed by a lot of people. And so in some areas, they are poisoned. In many areas, they are caught and traded for either their feathers or hunted for their meat as a food source. And their habitat has been degraded in a lot of that land as human populations have continued to grow and more farmland has left less forest land for the peafowl. In Africa, the Congo peafowl, they are the only pheasant species native to Africa, and they only live in one country. It's a very large country. It's the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is a very big country right in the very middle of Africa. That is a country that is mostly covered by forest with a little bit of grasslands in the southern and eastern regions. And they live primarily in the northern half of that country, in a lot of the same forest as animals like gorillas, chimpanzees, okapis. And so they do live in some very good protected areas, but much of that area is very remote. And because of that, we still don't know a lot about the Congo peafowl. It's also kind of scarce and pretty good at hiding, and so it's not as vocal or as brightly colored as its cousins, so it blends in quite a bit and it's seen less. Over the last few years, its population has declined as well. They are listed as vulnerable. A lot of the big problems there is that they're caught in snares that are set for other animals. And in that area, in that region, there's been some wars and a lot of refugees and a lot of human struggles. And whenever that happens, the animals struggle and suffer as well. Now with all the peafowl, they kind of have a very similar daily routine. They kind of wake up in the morning and they nest in tall trees at night. So they'll come down to the ground and they'll spend most of the day on the ground walking around looking for food. They'll kind of scratch at the ground to move leaves and other debris around, looking for little bugs, maybe some like centipedes, millipedes, spiders. They'll eat scorpions, but they'll also eat any seeds, nuts, berries that they find. So they're omnivores. They'll eat a little bit of everything. During the heat of the day, they're gonna find kind of a shady, cooler spot to rest and maybe spend some time to preen or clean their bright feathers. And then they're gonna get up kind of again in the afternoon as the day starts to cool down and look for more food, get something to drink. And then they'll kind of start to meet back up with the rest of their group. And they kind of go back up into the trees right around sunset, ready to roost for the night. Now for the blue and the green peafowl, they're big sized birds. The females typically weigh between like 6 and maybe 10 pounds, and the males weigh from like 8 up to 13 pounds. The females are between 36 inches from like beak to tail feather. And the males, including their big lawn trains or their big lawn feathers, can be up to 98 inches in length. So those big tail feathers, although they're not really the tail feathers, add a lot of length to them. The reason why I say that they're not really the tail feathers is because they actually attach mid-body to the peacock, and they actually have shorter tail feathers that are only about this long that are really big and strong. And those big, strong tail feathers kind of push the longer, more ornate feathers up for that big, beautiful display that we all know and love with peacocks. They do that for their courtship. So they're doing that to impress the ladies. In their second year, a male starts to grow those longer feathers, but the first year they don't get very long. They're only like this big. And they don't have the bright blue, they call them eyes, on their feathers for the first year that they grow those. So then the next year, during breeding season, they grow a little bit longer. And each year they grow longer and longer, and they get more of them. And so a bird that is probably like 6 to 8 years old is probably gonna have the most elaborate tail or plumage to display to the females. That way, that bird who's probably in his prime is going to attract more females to breed with. And that's the other thing too. One male will breed with multiple females. And once the breeding's done, he's done. He's not involved at all in the incubation of the eggs nor the raising of the chicks. So he's kind of a selfish guy. He likes to please a lot of the ladies with his elaborate dance. And then he's kind of back to his daily routine. When they raise those big feathers, their train is what it's called. When a female comes around, they'll kind of do a little dance where they'll turn back and forth to show off those big feathers. And when she gets really close, they start to shake those feathers. And all of those bright colors on the feathers will kind of glisten in the sun. And she'll give him a good look over to see if he's impressive enough to be her mate. And she decides if he's worthy of her to be breeding partners for that season. After they breed, she will, oh, we got a squirrel visiting us today again. I'll have to do a critter chat on squirrels since they show up almost every day while I'm out here. But she'll lay between 3 and 8 eggs. They're a bit bigger than a chicken size because these birds are also bigger than chickens. And their eggs are kind of lightish green or tan in color. She finds an area where she just kind of scrapes the ground up and kind of pushes the leaves and sticks off to the side. She'll lay the eggs, and then she does the incubating by herself. She'll stay on the nest almost continuously between 26 and 30 days until the chicks hatch. Baby peafowl, called pea chicks, once they're hatched, they can run and they can find their own food within a couple of hours. So they're pretty active, pretty quick, and they're little tiny. They're just little fluffs like this big. They pretty much all hatch right around the same time frame, within a couple minutes of each other, and then they follow their mom around. Now, for the first couple of weeks, they're too little to fly, and that means that they have to stay on the ground looking for food, and the mom stays with them, and she'll try to protect them. But during that time, the babies are super vulnerable to anything that may try to eat a baby bird, which would be a lot of snakes, a lot of small carnivores, a lot of other birds maybe even. So there would be a lot of predators for those babies. And unfortunately, although she may lay up to 8 eggs and have 8 chicks, typically only 2 make it to adulthood. So it's a risky couple of weeks right off. When they're about 2 weeks old, they can actually fly up into the trees. Peacocks, peafowl in general, don't spend a lot of time flying. They pretty much use it to get over something large like a big rock or a log, or to get up into their roosting tree at night. And that's about the only times they fly. Most of the time they kind of spend most of the day on the ground walking, looking for food. What else? Oh, and the mom does all the parenting. The dad's not involved at all. He's just back to his old routine of looking for food and taking care of himself. In my experience in the different zoos that I've worked at, we had free-roaming peafowl at both the Phoenix Zoo and at the Los Angeles Zoo during the times that I worked there. At the Phoenix Zoo, we had both males and females, so we did have babies a couple different times while I was there. I saw the babies. They were super cute. It was a little sad as we watched as they grew up. There would be less and less of them each time we saw them, but we did have some babies that survived to adulthood, so that was very fun. In a zoo world, they were very good birds to have around because they helped control insect populations, and in Phoenix, they also helped control the scorpions, which was very nice and appreciated by all the people around. I did see some interesting behavior at the Phoenix Zoo from the male peafowl, the peacocks. They get pretty defensive and they feel intimidated and threatened by other male peacocks in the area, and will sometimes try to chase them off or act aggressively towards them. However, if you look closely, their heads are pretty small, which means they have a small brain, and they're not always the smartest of birds. And that was shown to me several times. The first one that I remember was we had a vending machine near one of the exhibits where I worked that sold Dasani water bottles. And in the Dasani vending machine, it was very shiny and blue on the vending machine. And a male peacock is, of course, shiny and blue as well. And so when the peacock would come by the vending machine, he would see something else shiny and blue, and he would think it was another peacock in his territory, and he would get pretty upset and start acting very defensive. Specifically, he would look at the vending machine, and it was glossy, so he could see a little bit of reflection in there, but it was also blue. And so he would start to kick. He'd kind of back up a couple of feet, and then he'd run and he'd jump and he'd kick with both of his feet at the vending machine, which was a little interesting to watch him do, because as he kicked the vending machine, he would usually then get bumped back because it was hard plastic, and he would kind of fall to the ground, and he'd get back up and try kicking it again. He would do this for hours at a time. We would sometimes try to shoo him away so that he didn't hurt himself fighting a vending machine that wasn't really going to benefit him at all. But he would often come back every day, kind of at the same time of day, and start fighting the vending machine. In parts of the zoo, we had some areas where employees would park their cars, and we had a couple different cars that were pretty shiny and some that had really shiny metal bumpers. And the same thing happened there, to where they would start kicking and trying to fight against their own reflection on the shiny bumpers of the cars. Kind of sad, but really kind of interesting as well, because they were pretty determined to drive away whatever other peacock was in the area, even if it was their own reflection. During my time at the Los Angeles Zoo, that's where the photo I posted earlier today on Facebook and Instagram was taken. That peacock was actually in an exhibit with some other animals, and he would come and go as he pleased. He could make it over the fence really easily, but every day he would show up into the pronghorn yard. I think he would try to steal some of the pronghorn's food, but it was also just kind of a big area. It had some good shade. And for some reason, he thought it was important to try to impress the pronghorn. At the Los Angeles Zoo, we did not have any peahens. We didn't have any females. And so the males would often display to any other animals around, including animals that were not their species and certainly weren't even birds. So he would come into the pronghorn yard and he would pop up his big train feathers and he would dance around and show off his feathers. That is a younger bird. You can see that his train isn't as full as some other images that you can see on other peacocks, because he was probably like a 3 or 4 year old bird. He didn't have all the train feathers together. One other thing I always really enjoyed seeing with the peacocks at the LA Zoo is that they would go up into the trees. And sometimes when we would arrive in the morning, they'd still be up in the trees. And sometimes we'd see them in the afternoon right before we left. They'd be headed to the trees. And it was always pretty cool to see them fly up to the trees because we didn't see them fly all that much. The one big tree that they love to roost in, if you're familiar at all with the Los Angeles Zoo, is right by the carousel or the merry-go-round. That's kind of right in the middle of the zoo. And at that part, the zoo goes kind of either up high, there's a path, or down low, there's a path, and there's a big tree right in the middle. And so on the one side, it's only like a 15 or 20 foot flight up to the branch. But on the other side of the tree, it's about a 45 foot drop down to the ground. And it would sometimes amaze people how he got up there. And we'd say, oh, he approaches it from the other side where it's less of a flight. But super cool to see them in the trees. I have some other information I'll share with you about peafowl later today on the Facebook page, including some photos of the other species that you'll probably be less familiar with, but you can definitely see how and why they're related when you look at the similarities. So check that out later today on the Facebook page, and I'll also try to find some video footage of peafowl in the wild. I've seen some before in some animal documentaries filmed in India. Super interesting to see how they interact with some of the other animals in their native habitat, and pretty cool that an animal like that still lives, although we kind of see them more as almost a domesticated animal or an animal raised by humans quite often. They do occur still in the wild and are still definitely wild animals in India and much of that area of Asia. As always, until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, be safe, have fun. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and share any of my content across my different channels on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And check out my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. Until tomorrow, have fun.